Welcome to Dark Truth Stories. Before we dive into today's story, we have a humble request. Please consider subscribing to this new channel. Help us hit our first milestone of 1,000 subscribers. Your support will motivate us to keep bringing you more exclusive original cheating wife stories. And now, let's get started with today's story. I always thought of my home as a fortress, its walls built with trust and its roof shaded by love. In 20 years of marriage, I had laid every brick of this life with dreams and devotion. My name is Mark Brown, an honest, quiet man, living a simple life. My wife, Lori, who once was my entire world, and our daughter, Katie, together, they were my universe. But one night, a seemingly innocent exchange between mother and daughter on the patio shattered that universe into pieces. Katie, now 17, a little naive but pure-hearted, asked her mom, "Mom, what was the name of that man you were with at the club that night?" That question hit me like a stone to the chest. I was in the kitchen holding a mug of coffee, and in that moment, my entire world stopped. For the first time, I saw panic in Lori's eyes, something I had never seen before. She stammered, "Who?" Katie responded innocently, "The man who was kissing you." I saw it. I was wondering why you didn't tell Dad. My marriage crumbled in that instant. I walked out to the patio, my step steady, my voice cold. "Who was he, Lori?" There was no anger in my tone, no yelling, just the silence that comes before a storm. Lori looked into my eyes and uttered a single word. "Sorry." Just one word. 20 years, thousands of nights, countless sacrifices, and that's all I got. A sorry. I didn't need anything more. I walked out of the house without slamming a door, without a word, just the weight of broken dignity under my feet. I stood on the lawn and looked at the house I had built with sweat and love. For a few minutes, I remained still. And then, like someone had poured salt on an open wound, my memories began to unfold. The corner of the college library where I first saw Lori, her first smile, and the way Todd became part of our friendship. Todd, that name, long buried in my mind, had returned. Back in college, Todd's presence was always different. His jokes, his easy charm, his glances toward Lori, they weren't invisible. Maybe I didn't want to see. Maybe I believed too much in what we had. Lori and I were in love, and Todd hovered like a shadow. Then I got sick, hospitalized for weeks, and maybe that's when Lori and Todd opened a door I was never meant to see. After my recovery, Lori and I graduated and got married. Todd disappeared, like a forgotten chapter. I believed he was buried in the past. But the past has a habit of clawing its way back. And tonight, on that patio, our daughter's innocent question unearthed a corpse I thought long dead. I didn't confront Lori that night. She stayed in her room. I stayed in my silence. Katie was scared, but I simply placed a hand on her forehead and whispered, "What you saw was God's way of showing the truth. Not your fault." Once the house was asleep, I sat in front of my computer and began digging through Lori's old emails. And there, I found it. The message that destroyed every last illusion I had left. An email from Todd, dated 2016. "I know you love Mark, but you've never truly been away from me. Your visits give me hope," he wrote. "I know Katie is Mark's daughter, but were we ever really apart?" I read that message 3 times. Then I shut the screen and told myself, enough. No more explanations. No more apologies. Now it's time for answers. And if I don't get them, then I'll let silence speak for me. That night passed in restless turns, yet not a single layer of sleep touched my eyes. One name kept echoing in my mind. Todd Bennett. A name I had buried years ago, now coursing through my veins like fire. I went back, mentally, to where it had all started. The first day of university, the first time I saw Lori. She was sitting in the library, tucked into the corner of a table, wearing thick framed glasses, scribbling something in a blue notepad. Her fingers danced with the pen, and her face held that innocent glow that comes with a fresh beginning. Our first conversation started with a simple question about the time. But later that day, when we shared coffee at the campus cafe, I felt like I was reading a novel, one that had already hooked me in the first chapter. Lori and I became close, fast. We studied together, went to church together, watched movies. But soon, a third face became a constant shadow around us: Todd Bennett. He called himself my friend, but now I understand the quiet claim hidden in his smile. Lori never took him seriously, at least not outwardly, but his presence lingered like a cloud over us. Sometimes he'd call Lori tragic beauty as a joke, and she'd laugh. I laughed too back then, but now I realize how much pain was hidden in that laugh. In our third year, I was hospitalized with a severe infection. That's when the deepest crack in my life began to form. 2 weeks in a hospital bed, fighting pain, while Lori cared for me without fail. But during those 2 weeks, Todd's presence around her grew. Closer, more constant. Now, reading that email 2 decades later, the one where Todd wrote, "Were we ever really apart?" Everything played back in my mind like a movie on repeat. Those evenings when Lori would say, "Todd's just lonely, he needs a friend." Those nights when she'd come home late, citing group project meetings. I never questioned it. I wanted to be the ideal husband, the kind who trusts, who doesn't doubt, who stands steady. After graduation, I proposed to Lori and she said yes. We got married and moved to a new city. Todd vanished, without a goodbye. I believed the story had ended there. But in truth, it never ended. It simply went dormant. And today, with one innocent question from our daughter Katie, the still waters of the past had been stirred, and everything rose to the surface. Now I had Lori's one-word apology and Todd's emailed confession, but neither gave me peace. I wasn't looking for excuses. I wasn't even looking for clarity. I was trying to find myself, back in the moments when I first let Lori into my life. To understand, where did I go wrong? Was I too trusting? Too naive? Or just a man who never learned how to fight back? The next morning, I watched Lori in silence. Her face looked tired, but behind that weariness was fear. Raw, unspoken fear. The kind that knows the truth has already been uncovered, and the man in front of her is no longer the one who can be soothed with a single apology. I asked her quietly, "When was the last time you met Todd?" Lori looked up, startled, then said in a faint voice, 2019. My heart paused for a beat. "That was when Katie got really sick, remember?" I said. "I remember," she whispered, her voice cracking. "You said you were under stress. That's why you were coming home late. That's what you told me, right?" I looked her straight in the eyes. Tears welled up in hers, but I didn't offer comfort. The man who used to embrace her tears, that man was gone. I told myself, no more questions. Now I needed a decision. The evening sun dipped low behind the trees, casting a long shadow over a house now filled with an uneasy silence. There was no more haze clouding my vision, no confusion left to clutch. What remained was the raw, exposed truth. Sharp, burning, and impossible to ignore. I sat in the living room, motionless. Across from me on the couch sat Lori, curled into herself like a shrinking flame. Her fingers twisted together again and again, as if trying to wring an apology from her own skin. Without looking at her, I said, "There's nothing left to hide now, is there?" She lowered her head, and then, like a broken record, came the same old line. "Mark, I'm sorry." Those words now sounded as hollow as the final page of a book already burned. I stood up slowly, walked over, and sat directly in front of her. I looked into her eyes, the same eyes I had loved for years, but now all I saw was exhaustion and fear. "Why did you meet Todd again?" I asked. She stayed silent for a long moment, then whispered, "Because I was broken." I cut her off. "I was broken too, Lori, when your father passed, when Katie had that asthma attack, when I lost 3 months' salary in 1 week. But I never stepped outside the truth we built together." She began to cry, for real this time, but I didn't rush to hold her. I didn't reach for the tissues or stroke her back. That version of me was gone. "Do you know who I am?" I said. "I'm the man who called your mistakes human and my loyalty, duty. But I'm not a savior anymore, Lori. I'm a man, and this time, the man wants justice." She trembled, but her trembling didn't shake me anymore. "What did you think?" I continued. "That once Todd came back, you could pick up where you left off? And when he left again, because you know he always does, you'd just walk back into my life like nothing happened?" "I knew it was wrong," she said through tears. "But I just what?" I leaned forward. "You got bored of my honesty? My calmness started to scare you?" She said nothing. Her silence fueled the fire inside me. In 2019, when Katie was sick, I was the one running between doctors and emergency rooms. And you? What were you doing, Lori? Using Todd's arms as your stress relief? She buried her face in her hands, but I didn't hear the scream inside her soul. "Not anymore." "Did he understand you better than I did?" I asked. She slowly shook her head. "No." "Did you love him?" A long pause. Then, in a voice barely audible, she said, "No. Your silence scared me." I laughed, a long, cold laugh. "So my silence was scarier than your lies? Wow, Lori. And your betrayal? Was that just therapy?" She couldn't answer. Her tears weren't for me anymore. They were for herself, for her downfall. "I'm leaving this house," I said. "But not for you. For me. And the next time I walk back through this door, these walls will carry only my name. Yours will be on paper, and even there, I'll cross it out." She stood, tried to grab my arm, but I didn't jerk away. I just looked at her. And in that one look, she understood everything. I packed my suitcase, a few clothes, my journal, a photo of Katie when she was little, and the lifeless heart that once beat only for Lori. That I left behind in that house. I started the car and drove toward a hotel. On the way, I made 2 calls. The first, to my lawyer. "I want to begin divorce proceedings." The second, to Dr. Roberts. "I want a DNA test for Katie." My fight had begun. But this wasn't about revenge. It was about truth. From the window of that hotel room, the city lights glimmered in full bloom, yet every corner inside me was drenched in darkness. The ticking of the wall clock felt like it was measuring each second of my past 20 years, and I sat silently on the edge of the bed, counting the moments that would never return. 2 hours remained until morning, and I already had 2 names saved in my phone. Adam Clark, my attorney, and Dr. Roberts, the family doctor who had been seeing Katie since she was a child. At exactly 7 a.m., I called Adam. "Mark," he said groggily, "is everything all right?" "It will be," I replied. "I want to file for divorce. Reason, adultery. I have all the proof." There was a pause on the line. Then he asked, "You know what this could mean? The city will talk, the press might pick it up." "I don't care," I said firmly. "People talk even when you silently suffer everything. Now it's time they hear the truth." Next, I called Dr. Roberts. As soon as he saw my name, he picked up. "Mark, is everything okay?" "I need a DNA test done for Katie," I said without hesitation. There was dead silence on the other end. "Are you suspicious?" he asked. "No, I'm certain," I replied, "and I need that certainty in writing now." The following days changed everything. Adam prepared the divorce papers. A notice was sent to Lori, and the moment the media got wind of it, the next day's local headline screamed, "Successful engineer Mark Brown seeks divorce over wife's affair with former college friend." Social media lit up. Old friends started messaging, some in disbelief, some with sympathy. But not one of them asked how I was doing. And maybe I didn't need anyone to ask anymore. When Lori received the notice, she didn't respond. She locked herself in the house. Katie called me, her voice trembling. "Dad, will we never be a family again?" "We will, sweetheart," I told her. "But this time, built on truth. Love can't survive under the weight of lies." She whispered, "I want to live with you." I couldn't cry, but my eyes burned. Dr. Roberts took the DNA samples. Katie was told it was a routine medical test so she wouldn't panic. And I prepared my heart for the moment I might have to accept that the girl I raised may not be mine. Lori had to appear in court. Standing before the judge was the woman who once seemed like a goddess in my life, now reduced to a shadow weighed down by guilt. She wore a white blouse, her hair hung loose, and the dark circles under her eyes told me she hadn't slept in days. Adam presented the evidence: emails, photographs, hotel logs, and the message Todd had sent me. Lori said nothing. The judge asked, "Do you deny any of these allegations?" She shook her head. "No." Then she broke down, sobbing uncontrollably. I watched her in silence. There was no strength left in her. The woman who had once lit up my home now cast only a fading shadow on the courtroom floor. The DNA report came in 3 days later. Dr. Roberts called me to his clinic. He laid the papers in front of me. "Can I know the results?" I asked quietly. He nodded. "Katie is your daughter, Mark." But I felt no relief. Knowing she was biologically mine didn't ease the pain Lori had carved into me. I picked up the report, and on my way back home, I sent Lori a message. "You might be Katie's mother, but you are nothing to me now." That night, standing on the hotel balcony, I asked myself, what did I get in return for giving her everything? Just a poison that flowed through my veins like sweet water for years. But I was no longer the same man. My next battle was to rebuild myself. I had lived as a father, as a husband. Now it was time to live as a man, without the chains I had bound around my own wrists. When the walls within have crumbled and the ground of your soul has turned barren, a person needs a kind of breeze that asks no questions, seeks no explanations, just walks beside you like an old melody that reveals something new each time it plays. That's what I longed for. And so, I decided to leave the city for a while. I booked a week-long Caribbean cruise, my first real trip just for myself, with no plans, no expectations, and no strings attached. Standing on the ship's deck, looking out at the endless ocean, I felt as if the sea was silently pulling all my brokenness into its depths. Water surrounded me from all sides, waves rose and fell, and there I stood, an ordinary man, learning to smile while carrying a storm inside. The next morning, I was sipping coffee on the cafe deck when I saw her for the first time. A white shirt, light blue jeans, and hair dancing in the breeze. She held a book in her hands, though her eyes seemed fixed not on the pages, but on some thought far across the ocean. As I passed her, I caught a glimpse of the book's title, The Unbearable Lightness of Being. I smiled. Coincidence, maybe. But that was the very book I'd once gifted Lori before we got married. She turned toward me, and as if she had read my thoughts, she said, "If you're wondering whether this is my first cruise, yes, it is." I chuckled slightly. "And if you're wondering whether I was about to say that, yes, I was." She extended her hand. "Emily." I shook it gently. "Mark, Her hand was warm, but her grip carried no assumptions, like someone saying, "I'm here not to hold you down, but to walk beside you if you let me." From that point on, each day felt like a new wave. We sat together for hours, talking, laughing, saying a lot without touching the past. She never asked, "Are you married?" And I never asked, "Have you been hurt?" Our silences spoke fluently to each other. On the third night, when the stars above the ship looked close enough to touch, we had our first dinner together. The music was soft, and her hair rested gently on her shoulders. I wanted to say something, but the words held back. Emily broke the silence. "If you're thinking I seem to know too much, yes, I can see you're tired deep inside, but I'm not a remedy. I'm not sympathy. I just want to sit with your exhaustion." For the first time, I felt like I could cry, but I didn't. I just looked at her and said, "And for the first time, I want to let someone be close to me without needing to explain why." That night, we watched the ocean in silence, and when the breeze turned cooler, she placed her scarf over my shoulders. Not too close, not too far. The next morning, we went for a walk together. She smiled at every little thing, like a child discovering the world. At one point, when I nearly slipped, she held my hand and said, "If life's potholes looked this beautiful, people wouldn't be afraid of falling." I said, "I've fallen a lot, Emily." She replied, "But you're standing now and walking. It's not the ones who fall we remember. It's the ones who keep walking." On the final day of the cruise, as the ship slowly returned to shore, Emily asked me, "Do you think you'll want to be alone again?" I said, "I want to be with someone again, but this time, without letting go of the parts of me I lost last time." She looked at me and said, "Then we'll meet again, not out of need, but out of desire." In her eyes, I saw a promise, and that promise was so quiet, it drowned out every scream life had ever hurled at me. As I stepped off the ship, I said goodbye, and she simply replied, "See you soon." I returned to the city, but I was not the same man who had left. I was now someone who understood that not every fall demands revenge. Sometimes, the true answer lies in rebuilding yourself, piece by piece, on your own terms. Just a few days after returning to the city, the phone rang early in the morning. I glanced at the screen. Katie was calling. My heart froze for a moment. She never called this early. I panicked and picked up. "Dad." Her voice trembled. "Mom's been taken to the hospital. She might have taken some pills. I don't know why." For a few seconds, I couldn't speak. It was as if my voice was stuck in my throat. Then, pulling myself together, I asked, "Where are you?" "City General Hospital," she replied. "I'm here. The doctors aren't saying anything yet." I grabbed my keys and rushed out, heading straight to the hospital. My mind wasn't racing. There was no panic or confusion, just a deep silence, a weighty stillness that walked beside me like an invisible companion. When I arrived, I saw Katie sitting on a bench, her face tired, her eyes filled with fear. I went over and held her close. She rested her head on my chest and said, "I don't understand. Why would Mom do something like this?" I simply stroked her back and replied, "Sometimes, when the truth eats away at us from the inside, people break in silence." The doctor told us that Lori was now out of danger, but her mental and emotional state was extremely fragile. He recommended she stay away from visitors for a while. I nodded. I had no desire to see her. I was only there for Katie. The next day, when I dropped Katie home, she looked at me and asked, "Dad, do you think you'll ever forgive Todd?" I looked into her eyes, the same eyes as mine, now carrying the pain of her mother. I said, "Forgiveness is for mistakes. Todd didn't just make a mistake. He counted on me never fighting back. Until now, I had been silently enduring everything. But this time, it was Todd's turn to face consequences. Not through rage, but through evidence, law, and the crushing of his arrogance. I contacted my attorney, Adam. Together, we built a private case against Todd. Corporate favors extended to Lori, email exchanges, financial inconsistencies, mental health evaluations, an entire web of documented proof. Todd's career now rested in the palm of my hand, like a serpent's head caught in a fist. I held a press conference. Mark Brown, the man who had always stayed away from the media, now stood in front of the world. This isn't just a story about a broken relationship, I said. It's a story about a system that has normalized betrayal and expects people to just accept it as part of life. Before the media could ask a single question, I displayed the evidence. Emails, chats, hotel records, all linking Todd and Lori. A heavy silence fell across the press room. That very evening, Todd's name began trending. Todd Bennett, the man who destroyed a family. Later that night, I received a call from an unknown number. I answered. Mark. The voice was low, exhausted, but unmistakable. Todd? I asked. After a moment of silence, he said, What you did. You stripped me bare in front of the whole world. I responded, You stripped me bare from the inside, Todd. I just held up the mirror. He gave a shaky laugh. You've become far too clever for revenge. No, I said, I've just become calm enough for justice, something you never were in all your dirty games. The line went dead. A few days later, I received a message from Lori. It read, I lost you, and I lost my soul. Todd was never truly gone, Mark. I just got stuck in fear and habit. I didn't reply, because my fight wasn't against a man anymore. My fight was for myself, for the rebirth of my soul. Weeks had passed. The court dates had been finalized, the media frenzy had quieted down, and Todd's professional image had been reduced to nothing more than a disgraced face. But none of that mattered to me as much as the letter I found one evening when I returned home. It was lying on my doorstep in a plain brown envelope, addressed only with my name, Mark. No return address, no identity. I opened the envelope and began reading the handwritten letter inside. Every word felt like a stone being pressed against my chest, heavy, cold, sinking deeper with each line. Mark, I know I'm saying all this far too late, but some truths can only be spoken when a person starts hating themselves. I always thought Todd was my past, a mistake, an unfinished story. But the truth is, I never let him go. I saw him as my failure. And maybe that's why, when he came knocking again, I went back into the same illusion. I never stopped loving you, but I could never fill the emptiness within me. You gave me a home, respect, a daughter, but I couldn't become the woman who could truly stand beside you. Being with Todd felt like a race. I kept chasing a man who knocked me down every time, but I was too scared to admit I was weaker than him. Being with you was like facing a mirror, and I could never accept what I saw. When Katie asked me about that night at the club, something inside me cracked, like a mirror splitting open. I knew then, nothing could be hidden anymore. In that moment, your face flashed in my mind, the face I used for years but never really understood. I know there's no going back. I know you can't forgive me. Honestly, I can't forgive myself either. But I'm writing this letter. Maybe because sometimes the truth has to be told, if only to stop lying to oneself. Katie is your daughter, Mark, and I'm grateful that her eyes carry your truth, not mine. I hope one day you love again, but this time with someone who doesn't just see you as support, but as her ground to stand on. I lost you, and maybe I lost myself too, and that's punishment enough. Goodbye. Lori, I sat there for a long time after finishing the letter. There were no tears, no relief. just a strange kind of dampness in my soul, like a wound too deep to bandage, one that now had to remain open to finally heal. Later that night, I walked over to Katie's room. She was busy with her studies. I gently placed my hand on her head and said, "You're my most precious reason. For every decision I made, every silence I kept, and every new step I'll take." She looked up at me with a smile and said, "Dad, you're smiling again. It feels like everything is getting back to how it used to be." I said, "This is just the beginning, sweetheart. But this time, whatever we build will be real." The letter is still with me. I wanted to burn it. But then I thought, some scars are worth keeping, so that when we smile again, we never forget where we once broke. When the first light of morning crept through the window, the envelope with Lori's letter was still sitting on my desk. The ink had completely dried, but the words still left a wet heaviness in my chest. I knew this story was approaching its final turn. And before every final turn, there's always one last mountain. For me, that mountain was the confirmation of the DNA report, the final court hearing, and the one sentence I needed to say to Lori, face to face, to be free of this marriage forever. I told Adam, my attorney, that I wanted to deliver the closing statement myself. He looked at me, a bit hesitant. "Mark, this is court. Emotions don't always work here." I said, "I won't speak with emotion. I'll speak with truth. That's my greatest strength." That day, the courtroom felt tense. Lori stood across from me, transformed. The glow on her face had faded, and not even her crisp white blouse could hide the burden in her soul. Anyone looking into her eyes could see that the woman who once built shiny walls around herself was now an empty shell. The judge invited both sides to make their final statements. Adam glanced at me. I stepped up without hesitation and took the mic. "Your Honor," I began, "I stand here not just as a betrayed husband, but as a man who once considered trust the highest virtue. I've been married 25 years. We have a daughter, we had a home, and we had a life that now only exists on paper." The courtroom fell silent. I never expected perfection from Lori. All I asked for was honesty, especially when everything else in my life was falling apart. When I was rushing to hospitals, when my daughter's breath was faltering, my wife was finding comfort in the arms of her past. I paused and looked directly at Lori. Her eyes avoided mine. I did a DNA test, not out of doubt, but for truth. And that truth gave me peace. Katie is my daughter, and that showed me that in a world full of lies, some relationships are still real. I turned to the judge. "Your Honor, I'm not asking for punishment. I'm asking for justice. And my justice isn't about leaving Lori. It's about saving the part of me this relationship tried to destroy. I want this divorce, but I want nothing in return. No money, no property, no compensation. I just want to be able to see myself again without carrying this weight." I finished my words and returned to my seat. Lori still didn't speak. Tears were flowing down her face, but there was no hope left in them. The judge read the verdict aloud. "This marriage is hereby dissolved. Divorce granted." There was no ring on my finger anymore, but there was a calm in my heart. The kind a prisoner feels when their sentence is finally over. As I was leaving the courthouse, Lori approached me. Her lips trembled, and she spoke in a whisper. "Will you ever be able to forgive me?" I looked at her and replied, "I forgave you a long time ago, but forgetting myself, that stops now." She stood there for a moment, then turned and walked away. And I, for the first time, walked forward with full faith in my own steps, without ever looking back. Time has a strange habit. When you want to forget someone, they appear in front of you again and again. And when you want to hold on to someone, they quietly slip away. After the court's verdict, I rented a small place on the outskirts of the city near the ocean. There were no photographs, no memories, just silence and me with my solitude. Katie was preparing to leave for college. She had been accepted into a university in New Jersey. I was helping her pack, and the quiet between us wasn't heavy anymore. It had become a kind of closeness. "Dad," she asked me one afternoon, "do you think you could ever fall in love again?" I smiled. If I meet someone who can understand even my silences, then yes, maybe I could. She looked at me for a moment, then softly said, "Emily?" I didn't reply, just gently patted her back. After Katie left, the house grew quieter than ever. But now that quiet no longer scared me. It felt peaceful. And maybe that's why, later that evening when the doorbell rang and I found Lori standing outside, I wasn't surprised. She wore a light green cardigan, her hair now trimmed to shoulder length. There wasn't regret in her eyes anymore, just a tired kind of hope. "Can I come in?" she asked. I paused for a moment, then opened the door slightly and nodded. She walked in and looked around. The walls were bare, and the only thing on the sofa was a book. The same book Emily had given me. The Unbearable Lightness of Being. "Are you happy here?" she asked. "Yes," I said. "Very." There was a long pause. Then, in a low voice, she asked, "I've lost so much, Mark, but losing you hurt the most. Do you think, maybe someday, we could start over?" I looked into her eyes. The same eyes where I once saw my home. But now all I could see was a barren winter field. "Lori," I said gently, "there's nothing left for you to take from me. And there's nothing left in me to give you." She didn't cry. It seemed like she already knew the answer, but still needed to hear it out loud. "I've forgiven you," I said. "But my heart no longer beats for you. It beats only for myself now. And for the one who didn't let me fall apart." Lori bowed her head, then looked at the house one last time, and without another word, stepped outside. Like an old character who no longer fits the story, she quietly exited the stage. I closed the door, took a deep breath, and walked toward the kitchen. And just then, as if my life had stolen a page straight out of a movie, the doorbell rang again. I opened it, and there she was, Emily, in her familiar gray hoodie, wearing that smile that said, "I didn't come looking for you. I came back to you." I was about to speak when she gently touched my hand and said, "I told you, we'll meet again. Not out of need, but out of desire." I held her hand, and for the first time, my smile felt truly real, because it carried no sorrow, no regret, only a new beginning. When the waves crash against the shore, they don't erase the sand, they simply reshape it. Maybe life is the same. We don't break, we rebuild. And today, as I sat on the balcony of our new home with Emily beside me, every storm inside me had finally settled. The sky was blue, the ocean stretched endlessly below, and the breeze carried the scent of life returning. Emily rested her head on my shoulder and said, "You look different now, Mark." "How so?" I asked. "Like you're not carrying anything anymore." She smiled. I closed my eyes and replayed the journey. Years with Lori, Katie's birth, the night everything shattered, the courtroom, the DNA results, Todd's phone call, and then a letter. And through it all, one unexpected encounter had led me here, to a new beginning with Emily. Katie's now in university. We talk often. Her voice no longer carries confusion, but calm, the kind I tried to reflect in every choice I made. Once, she told me, "Dad, you're not the same anymore. You feel whole." And I smiled and said, "Sometimes being incomplete is what makes us whole." Emily and I are together now, not bound by promises, nor chained by fears. Between us, there are no sighs from the past, no worries of the future, just the present. And in that, peace. Sometimes at night, I walk down to the beach. I sit by the shore, but I don't write names in the sand anymore, because I don't need a name to define myself now. I've become a man who recognizes his own shadow and feels no shame in it. Lori's in another city now, perhaps still fighting herself, or maybe she's found peace. I wish her well, but there's no space for her in my house or in my heart anymore. News about Todd pops up now and then. Word is he gave everything up. Maybe he finally collided with the truth he couldn't see in his own shadow. One day I asked Emily, "Don't you think we met too late?" She said, "No. We met when you didn't need someone to hold you, just someone to walk beside you." Every day with her now feels like a new wave, calm but alive. And every morning, in the sound of the sea, I hear my own name, Mark. A man reborn from the ashes of betrayal, now learning to live again. Each morning, dew settles on the plants we keep on the balcony. Emily gently wipes them clean, like she's softly healing an old wound. My fears, my rage, my pain are all buried in the layers of my past life. Now I live, consciously and fully. And when people ask me, "Mark, did you fall in love again?" I just look at Emily once. I see myself in her eyes, and I say, "For the first time, I've truly understood what love means." And as this story ends, one question still lingers. If you were given a chance to forgive your past, but not relive it, would you still choose the pain that shaped you into who you are today? What would your answer be? Think about it.